My friends, good day. This weather. Earlier, someone shared with me a video of a woman screaming without despair about the removal or restriction of bank overdrafts starting from November 2026. So I don't feel like I have the right to share this video with you because I don't know where. This woman originally published it, so I don't want to share it beyond what she would have wanted. But on the other hand, I can tell you that it was a powerful video, that the woman was crying out in despair. And she clearly said that this overdraft is what allowed her to feed her children because her account was empty from the 15th of the month. And so this lifeline that allowed her to get by, well, it's going to be taken away from her starting next year. That's why she's desperate. Let me tell you the story. You should know that France, like many European Union countries, no longer truly controls its own fate. These are countries that have given up their sovereignty, and each one has given up its sovereignty for a different reason. If you want, you can see. Some Eastern countries gave up their sovereignty in exchange for massive subsidies that allowed them to rebuild after decades of Soviet rule. Whereas countries like France may be a little less interested because it was a country that functioned extremely well, with an economy that, objectively speaking, was highly surplus. And so it had no reason to join this complicated system. And ultimately to share, to have to pay for others somewhere along the line. Why discuss the European Union? Because this whole story about limiting bank overdrafts comes from the European Union. It doesn't originally come from the French authorities. The latter, no, they just follow along, really. They only have to take the decisions of the European Union and implement them in their national legislation. So what's going to happen? If you want, at the beginning, the situation as it is today, there is what we call the overdraft. The overdraft is a kind of cash advance, a sort of cash flexibility that the bank grants to clients. You open your account, and then if after a few weeks or a few months, money comes in and goes out, and the account is used normally and well managed, they will generally, without you even needing to ask, open an overdraft line for you. They can even increase it. It can go up to 1,000 euros. It gives you cash flow flexibility. And of course, the tighter you are financially, so we're talking about people who are in a precarious situation. I'll talk about it in a minute. Well, the tighter you are financially, the more this kind of cash flow flexibility is necessary. It's a breath of fresh air. So Europe, that's what it's saying. It says that, yes, since people are at risk of falling into a system of over-indebtedness. With the bank overdraft is usually repayable on demand. Literally, it's very short term. So that's not where the cycle of over-indebtedness starts. In any case, they say it's to avoid over-indebtedness. What are we going to do? We're going to abolish the overdraft system as it is now. And we're going to replace it with something that looks more like a loan. That means people will have to show their income, sign contracts, go through a lot of procedures to get this overdraft, which will no longer really be an overdraft. Technically speaking, it will be a loan. When people online claim they're getting rid of the overdraft, many fact checkers respond and say no. It won't be eliminated, but it will be changed. In this way, in that way, in another way. I want to tell you, if my aunt had them, we wouldn't call her my uncle. You see what I mean? So the overdraft, we know what it is. Adding requirements like paperwork and income turns an overdraft into a loan. So very often in Europe, with the European Union, even with the French national authorities, the stated legislative intention is completely the opposite of what we actually want to achieve on the ground. We're in a system, in a dialectic, honestly. We're in Orwellian Orwell. Isn't peace war? And vice versa. So what we do is we show an intention, but the goal is something else entirely. So what are we really going to do here? We say we want to prevent households from getting over-indebted. Households actually end up this way, and I'll discuss it again later, possibly in more detail. Households end up with nothing left in the middle of the month. That's because the state has already created the conditions to confiscate their income, which means that the majority of French people literally find themselves at the poverty line. That's already the case. Secondly, by taking away from them This cash flow convenience or this advance on funds, we're actually going to force them into debt. So at that point, instead of having an overdraft, they'll end up with a debt system. So if there's a consumer loan contract, it'll probably be revolving. That means you take on a debt and then you pay off part of the debt. So imagine, let's say you take on a debt of 2,000 euros. You've paid 1,200. So at that point, what do? We let you refill the debt and take back 1,200 and go back up. We then raise the limit to 2,500, 3,000, and 4,000. That's revolving or ongoing credit. You become a slave. You're chained forever. Especially since once you've paid the interest on the debt and made the payments and everything, you don't really have any money left to live on. So what you have to do is you have to dip back into that debt, you have to pay, and 5 minutes later go withdraw money. So it traps you in a cycle. The advantage for the banks is that this system, these will be longer term debts, which bring in much more profit. It allows them to create new products. It allows these products to be turned into securities that can be traded on the stock market or elsewhere. Remember the stories. The collapse of 2008, what was it? It was credit default swaps at the core. It was credit default swaps that had been created on debts. American households who had taken out mortgages to buy houses that were overvalued and who bought houses with money they didn't have. So what we're going to do is actually push millions of people into over-indebtedness while pretending to fight against it, which is still a classic. Now, I'd like to tell you something. The French system is quite interesting, isn't it? If you look, the French don't touch money. The French are very poorly paid. Very poorly paid, very poorly paid. The French are very poorly paid. I saw, for example, a job posting that was shared with me by a friend. Imagine that in a university classroom, there's a board for people who are preparing for or finishing their doctorate. Well, there are job postings that require a doctorate. Those job postings list salaries of 1,600 to 1,700 euros a month. I have to say, and forgive my bluntness, I want to say that this is a form of modern slavery. There are people who tell me, yes, but the French are all minimum wage earners. The French are not minimum wage earners. I'll tell you the reality. The reality is this. If you call the French minimum wage earners, it's like if you went into let's say, in the 1800s, the early 1800s, you go to the slave states of the American South, you go to a corn, coffee, or cotton plantation. You go see those slaves and you say, oh, look, they're poor. They don't have a penny to their name. But why don't they have a penny to their name? Let's discuss those slaves, since the slave system takes the fruit of their labor. It's not that they don't work. They work 12 hours a day. Some of them work 7 days a week. When they slow down, they're whipped. But the result is that indeed they are poor. Why are they poor? It's not because they don't create value. They are poor because they create value for others. So it's exactly the same story with the French. The only thing we still can't do, it's the same for the British. We still can't hit them with a stick to force them to work. That's why we have a lot of people who withdraw from the system, go on long-term unemployment, or take endless sick leave. All that because up until now, we still can't force them to work. But what's the reality really? The reality is that the French state is a sprawling state, a state that has literally corrupted the nation and that takes and spends as it pleases, at its whim, at its leisure. It spends the wealth of the nation. So it takes the fruit of millions of people's labor. So millions of French people can't fulfill their lives, can't achieve their dreams, can't help their children, can't have ambitions like any human could have. Their only prospect is to pay the state, and actually the state takes that money and makes it seem like it's wasting it. And on top of that, the French water distribution system could have had some validity. Strictly speaking, and I do mean strictly speaking, if the country was surrounded by a Great Wall of China, if, for example, the system operated in a closed loop, That means with a limited number of people who could potentially receive the benefits of the French state. But the reality is that the French state potentially has 8 billion people who have rights to it. But know that one complaint is enough about climate change, rain or heat or cold, or floods or droughts. Based on their own taste or any subjective reference point, just a feeling is enough. Exactly, she has an enforceable right. She has the right to demand the fruit of the French people's labor. And so, at that point, widespread impoverishment becomes inevitable. Why are all French people paid only minimum wage, making it both the lowest and highest salary? And well, some more than others. Well, there you go. They get it. They say they get everything. You have to get rid of the minimum wage or something like that. But in reality, they're always in the same range. On minimum wage, you're poor. Remove it to change that. Actually, it's not that they don't produce value. Once again, it's that the state takes it through public authority. You can't get out of it. Let me tell you something. If you look at my bio on Twitter, what will you see? You'll see the word anarchist. Maybe I should explain that someday. Why anarchist? Listen, it's just us talking and we have time. If you look in everyday life, we all live in peer-to-peer relationships. You're watching this video because you want to. No one is forcing you. Reflect on what you did today. Maybe you ate with friends. Did someone force you to go? Did someone put a gun to your head to make you go? No, you went because you wanted to. You go out with someone. Look, think about your life partner or your spouse. You're there with them, I hope, because you want to be. No one forced you. So in everyday life, when you go buy a coffee in the morning, it's a black coffee, not tea, because you wanted to buy a black coffee. Actually, if you want, our whole life is lived in an anarchic way. There's no hierarchy forcing anything on us. We all live by mutual agreement. So, of course, when you look at everyday vocabulary, what does anarchy mean? Anarchy means disorder, catastrophe, filth, everything collapsing, people running everywhere, violence, all that. No, if you think that, it's because, in fact, that's how language works. The elements of language come from the ruling classes. They made you believe that if you're not controlled by a coercive force, well, you inevitably go back to a savage state. There you go. So you express it that way. It's a way of saying, thankfully, you're here, you, the ones who dominate me. My masters for whom I work, my masters who take all my labor and leave me just enough to eat. Even by mid-month, I'm already broke. Luckily, those masters exist or I'd become a savage again. That's not true. No one will become a savage again. Let me explain. If you look at everyday life, we're all in a give and take logic in all our relationships. Two entities don't respect the give and take. I'll tell you what they are now. The two entities that don't respect give and take, that use violence, that use coercion, are the state and the criminal. That's all. If you want to give someone 10 euros, you give them willingly, or you lend them willingly, or you offer them willingly, or you take them by force. It's the state that can carry out a seizure. It can harass you with reminders. It can send bailiffs to you. It can send the police if necessary. It can drag you before the courts. It will use violence to extract from you or to force you to act as it sees fit. And when it changes its mind, the coercion will adapt to that opinion. Today, something is legal. Tomorrow, the state can make it illegal. Then the forces of coercion are quickly established to defend this new state idea. Do you want to see? And at the same time, who does that too? It's the criminals who use similar methods, methods of coercion as well, methods of violence, to take you as well, or to push you, or to force you to act in one way or another, right? That's why the state and the criminals should be placed exactly in the same category, especially when the state has been captured by forces that act in interests contrary to those of the nation, who act in oligarchic interests, who act in the interests of international powers, of foreign powers, you see. in that case, indeed, the state becomes a hostile occupying force. So the state is a hostile element. It acts against you. And so, indeed, when we have a state like that, it's clear that we end up with widespread impoverishment, which we end up having regularly. Laws that come out of nowhere, pushing people more and more toward despair, putting them in increasingly complicated situations. Remember what I said in a previous video. He creates crises, he complicates the solutions by which these crises can be resolved. It's like France today. I said at the beginning of the video, it was a vassal of the European Union. Implied we have to leave the European Union, but leaving won't be enough. It's a necessary condition, I would say, but not sufficient. In reality, where in another era a revolution would have been needed to get out of it, today, two are needed. We need one to leave the European Union and a second one right after, to get rid of the harmful elites who are impoverishing an entire nation, stealing the lives of existing generations as well as future generations. So that's the reality. The reality is that indeed the French create a lot of wealth. Just look at the collective national wealth, which is enormous. But the majority creates it and the minority gets it, you see? And then a minority manages it. And for the overwhelming majority, well, it's just the coal factory, the cotton field, the Réseau Express Regional A at 7 in the morning. And then that's it. And every day you hear some new piece of news that comes in, that's going to make your life even worse, as if that was necessary. Anyway, my friends, I wanted to share this feeling with you. And you have to know one thing. Whenever laws are created, even if you see the banks pretending to complain or whatever, it's always a bunch of hypocrites. Laws are always created to the advantage, at the request, and in the interest. Dominant banks. Banks are dominant forces. No one is going to create a law that goes against the banks. If a law is created, it is in the interest of the banks. Will your daily newspaper say otherwise? There you go, my friends. Thank you for watching this video right here. I'll put the link in the description for my book, The Great Betrayals. I recommend you read it because you'll understand what kind of person you're dealing with. You're locked in, and I'll see you in the next video. See you very soon.